Greetings, one and all. It is I, your raspy, sore-throated host, Bill Gullen. Thank you for joining Champions of Purposeful Change. I'm the president of Finch Brands, a premier boutique brand consultancy and research supplier. And we're grateful to have you with us here. We're really starting off 25 with a bang by hosting Jennifer Avery. Jennifer is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Insights at Universal Destinations and Experiences. We'll talk about theme parks. We'll talk about her career journey, her academic interests, how we normally do. We're going to go through it all. And I think you'll really appreciate Jennifer's perspective, her candor about research, about our industry, about how you need to be wired to thrive in this profession. And she also gives her take on smart research versus dumb research, as well as the opportunities for technology and a whole bunch more. So enjoy Jennifer Avery. We are so grateful to have Jennifer Avery with us, who's the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Insights at Universal Destinations and Experiences. Jennifer, thanks so much for your time.
Happy to be here.
Excellent. Let's start where we normally do. You had a cultural anthropology interest all the way back academically, which I should call you Dr. Avery on here, given the PhD program and whatnot. But tell us about sort of where it began, and take us, if you wouldn't mind, through sort of the career journey that's led you to where you are at Universal.
Sure. I think my market research career is, like a lot of people's, kind of accidental. I've met very few humans who always dreamed of being a market researcher and had a very organized plan for doing that, even up to the college level. So yeah, I do have a PhD in cultural anthropology. My intent when I started that program was to be a professor, in a traditional academic environment. But something happened along the way. When I was in graduate school, I took a side gig for a shopper insights firm. They had started advertising on our graduate listserv, like our email messaging distribution, and they were looking for ethnographers, they called them. Really, it was field interviewers.
Yeah.
And it was the strangest thing. This company would ship you overnight, like a Palm Pilot, and this is in the very early 2000s. So this was incredibly innovative technology. And on the pilot was programmed a survey, and there was a protocol and a training, and they would send you into a store that they had, partnered with.
Right.
And give you a set of instructions. And those instructions usually were something like observe shoppers in a certain category, because the client was, of course, a very specific category, generally in the consumer packaged goods space. And you would wait in the wild for the shopper to show up, and you would surreptitiously observe them according to the protocols. And then when they were clearly done, either having selected a product and moving out of the aisle or finished their browsing and leaving, you would pounce on them in a very awkward fashion and say, hey, I was just sort of stalking you in a research fun kind of way. Will you consent to do this 10-minute structured interview? And I'll give you, a $10 incentive or something.
Yeah. And
so I thought that's very curious. At the time, I was looking for a company to study. My area of concentration and my program was, anthropology of work.
Right.
And I really wanted to get into a company, to study a company as if it was my kind of tribe or culture, right? So I thought, I'm gonna go work for this company. I'm gonna make a few extra bucks. The pay was actually like probably 30% higher than the hourly wage for a graduate assistantship.
Right.
And all you had to do was humiliate yourself and drive out to a 7-Eleven in Valrico or whatever, and accost a bunch of construction workers, ask them why they didn't buy a Dr. Pepper. I'm an introvert by nature, so this was, pretty miserable work. But I'm also a very responsible human, so I did it. I made my quotas. I did well. I wrote up good reports, and eventually I made kind of my way into a more permanent position to that company, recruiting, training, staffing, doing analytics on the side, and finally negotiated a full-time position from them. One of the conditions for my full-time employment was that the company would let me study them like a culture.
Cool.
And they didn't care. So they were like, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
And 10 years later, I actually finished my PhD. I got so sucked into actually the work of this company
Yeah.
I just really enjoyed it. I found myself kind of fascinated by the corporate America and just like the whole culture of this. I was just actually pretty good at it. It was just like a really suitable fit for my temperament, like way more kind of in a very overt fashion, kind of like brutal and cutthroat in a way that I kind of appreciated. So I just really kind of got into it, and I was promoted multiple times. So the money was good. I was making way more than I was ever going to make as an academic.
Right.
And by the time I was actually finished with my PhD, I was just like, this is it. I'm going to do this now because one, I had not really done the things that I needed to do to acquire a tenure track position. I had published a bunch of stuff because I was working 80 hours a week for this vendor. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I had a couple of kids during that time period too, which made everything more difficult. But mostly I just actually really enjoyed this side of the business. So, I entered in accidentally. I had ulterior motives. I did finish my PhD out of spite because you don't really need one, obviously, to work in this industry. And it's certainly too late to go back now. I'm on what they would call in academia the dark side.
Right.
And I enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, my wife is a PhD psychologist who stayed on, I guess, the light side if we're the dark side. What is the through line? I mean, cultural anthropology with an interest in the workplace, into research. What are the kind of things about your wiring, I guess, that make this and continue to make this fulfilling for you? I mean, curiosity about others, about how decisions are made. Have you been able to ever sort of put your finger on why it lights you up the way it does?
Yeah, I mean, one is just very pragmatic, methodological, right? If you get certain methodological training as somebody who is pursuing a master's or a PhD in a social science. So just being able to apply your knowledge of various quantitative and qualitative methodologies for data acquisition, data analysis is something that was attractive to me. I mean, I always really liked being an individual contributor, doing the analysis and the data collection. So lots of different social sciences do train people in those sort of methodologies, and finding jobs where you can apply them. This is one of those jobs. Mm-hmm. But then, the other side of it is just curiosity, wanting to know why people do what they do. I mean, I think it is mostly just the thrill, the mundane thrill of being confronted with a business challenge or a research question, and then having to figure out a way to get that information. Right. That's what I actually really enjoy, because, writing a survey about corn chips or even theme parks,
right,
there are more interesting things to research in the world. Right. But I think the exercise of being given a question that is nebulous and vague and just generally fraught, and then the challenge of having to figure out a way of like, how am I going to operationalize this? How am I going to turn this into something that I actually can create variables out of in an appropriately reductive fashion? That is really fun to me. I really enjoy that part, and I always will. So it almost never mattered whether I was doing a project on toothpaste or hemorrhoid cream or any number of things that I ended up doing work on the vendor side. It was the act of designing the research that was personally most satisfying to me.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And so now in your role at Universal Destinations, part of the Comcast NBCU family, obviously a big innovative player in that space. Could you sort of speak to what that means day in and day out? Obviously, there's a portfolio of resorts around the world and destinations around the world. You talk about rigor and methodological stuff. I'd imagine theme parks are at the sort of intersection of families getting value for the dollar in terms of smiles, also the connection to sort of cultural inputs and entertainment properties, and it kind of sorted out for us and kind of the role you're playing with you and your team day in and day out at Universal.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on one of the reasons why I chose, when I went client side, to work for a company like Universal. I did want to go client side, but I didn't, as much as the thrill of methodological design was there. How many times can you write a survey about corn chips? Like, it's got to get a little old. So theme parks are amazing because there is so much to research. Like, we sit in marketing technically,
Yeah.
And because of that, we do all of the kinds of research that you would expect from an internal agency that services marketing clients. So like we track brand health and competitive brand
Right.
health, and we help our marketers with ad tests and ad performance tracking, and we help our marketers understand our guest profiles and do segmentations and all of the kinds of things, tagline tests and naming tests and
Yeah.
just anything that a marketer could want. We do all of those things, and those things are interesting. But we also work with our partners in operations, the people who actually run the theme parks, so they want to know all about, the performance of, their team members in providing guest service. And they want to know like how guests are moving throughout the park and what they're doing and how they make their plans and all those types of things. Obviously, we work with Universal Creatives, and those are kind of our, our version of our Disney Imagineers, right? These are the people who actually dream up the amazing attractions that, our resorts offer. And, they are great clients of ours who ask, for human insights in terms of why people want to go on whatever rides they want to go on and what drives satisfaction in those rides. And, what can we glean, from innovative ideas, and how do we know if something's going to work, right? They engage us on, certain questions like that, but we've got hotels and there's research to do there. We've got food and beverage, there's research to do there. There's shopping and retail, there's research to do there. There's vacation planning, there's research to do there. There's an infinite variety of topics in the space. So even after 12 years doing this, I certainly know a lot about theme parks,
Yeah.
I probably know more about theme parks than, most people you're ever going to meet, right? But there still is a lot more that I could know. And that is actually very exciting and interesting. So I do work for the parks. I directly oversee consumer insights for our domestic parks. So that is Universal Orlando Resort in Orlando, Florida, and Universal Studios Hollywood in Los Angeles, California. I have great colleagues and partners at our parks in Beijing, in Singapore, and in Japan. So while I do not oversee those functions, we have a lot of kind of best practices sharing. We work in partnership on joint projects, these types of things. My organization has a somewhat of a global role in kind of being a consultative partner to some of our CI and strategy groups in the broader global parks. We are unusually a DIY function, a wholly DIY function.
Yeah.
So we have gone to considerable trouble over decades, really. This preceded my involvement at Universal, building up the infrastructure to, gather surveys, build databases, build reporting engines. We do all the analysis ourselves, all of the, conjoints ourselves, all the segmentations ourselves. Like we outsource literally nothing. I have an ethnographic division that focuses on qualitative that, I have 7 PhDs work in my function. So we are a very well constructed, do it yourself, fully in-house sort of operation, which makes us, fairly unusual, I think, in the industry.
Yeah, makes sense. And having a practitioner, I mean, you mentioned earlier wanting to go client side and starting your career, at least on the dark side of your career in a supplier role. But then you talked also about the incredible diversity of things to study, how you never run out. So, the old sort of trope, the great thing about agency side or supplier side is you work on all these different kinds of things. The great thing about client side is, depth and impact and other things. But it sounds like, I mean, could you speak about just within your career and sort of how you see the differences between the two and how that sort of played out for you?
Yeah, I mean, we only know what we know. So I'm sure I'm going to say something that, your listeners will be like, that's totally wrong, lady. And, maybe I am. I'm somebody who definitely does not like job hop, right? I mean, I've been here 12 years. I was at my supplier agency for almost 10 years. And prior to that, I was a kid working in school and working in, at Walmart, right? So like I've only had 2 grown-up jobs. In 25 years in this industry, and that is because, wherever I go, I tend to do pretty well. So, I stick around, but also because I really have a strong belief that good research is not just a handful of methodologies that you have in your pocket that you can apply to any domain, but it is a substantive body of knowledge that you possess and that you bring to the table whenever you do a project. Like every project, and that's kind of a problem with the industry. It's sort of like every project exists on its own in this sort of vacuum. Yeah. And that's just really weird to an academic, where all knowledge should be cumulative, Right. So right now I have so much invested in my cumulative knowledge as a theme park expert, not that I couldn't go work somewhere else, I could, but it's like I would have to start all over right. to become an expert in that space, which I could do quickly enough, but, I just, when you're talking to an academic, they've generally studied, a domain or two or three their whole lives, right? So I kind of feel very strongly about that, and it's one of many reasons that I stick around. I mean, Universal is also a great company to work for, so right. I mean, there's that as well. So my experience on the vendor side was incredible. It taught me so much. I mean, I highly recommend to, especially, some of my more junior team members who are like not sure this is the life for them, right? They're not exactly sure they want a career in market research. Like, my advice to them is go work for a vendor. Like, you're not gonna, if you really want to sharpen your knife, I mean, you can do it under me, like I'll sharpen it for you, but I mean, you will really go through some kind of hazing on their vendor side, and your eyes will be open to like so much more like breadth and scope of what the industry actually is like, that what, even if you hate it, it's like it's really good exposure, right? So there's a lot of value there. And of course, it was interesting to work for so many different clients, and it was great to be able to travel to all these different client headquarters and meet so many people. That was interesting. But even if you develop really strong relationship with your clients and do multiple projects for them, I always felt you're still not one of them. You're never really privy to the detail on exactly how the research was used. And so much of my job now is less about a specific project, but more figuring out how to bring insights to the broader organization. Right. And my brain is a lot, consumed with, the politics and the social dynamics of my organization, and how I can help my team negotiate and navigate that space so that we're using insights the best way. And that is nearly impossible for a vendor to do. And you're not even aware, probably to a certain extent, of how ineffective your research really is, because you don't have, that access. Also, it just so happened, and I think this is not universal, but relatively common on the vendor side. I mean, that's a sales gig. And the higher you go up, the more they want you to be a salesperson.
Sure.
And I was a salesperson. The sales guys, I loved them to death. They used to drag me around all over the country, trying to talk people into buying our stuff. And I would be like their little stunt, like nerd person, right? And I sold a lot of work because, I'm pretty compelling, and, clients can smell a sales guy coming a mile away, but, I was the goods. So, I was effective in that space, but I didn't enjoy it. Like, I didn't want my career ascension to be dependent on being a salesperson. I'm a researcher. Sure. And on top of that, especially if you work for a smaller mid-sized company, like the economics are real. Mm-hmm. And having to make those sales so that you keep that company afloat is like a pressure that you just, you gotta know it and feel it to believe it. And that means that you oversell and you overcommit and you overwork people. So my dissertation actually was written about the company I worked for. And a lot of it is about how hellish the hours are when you're in that vendor side, and how little control you actually have over your work-life balance, because, the livelihood of the entire company is really dependent on the work that you do and making more sales. And that was great in my 20s and early 30s. It's not something I would do again in my 40s and beyond.
Yeah, you eat what you kill, no doubt. To that point about impact, and the unique ability that those on the client side have to see work through, as well as understand all the dynamics. You originally came to our attention. One of our team members attended a talk that you gave at one of the industry shows, I think, in the last year, and your topic, I won't even sort of try to remember exactly word for word what the title of the talk was, but the gist of it was the difference between real research and, cover your butt, or more political, or sort of less, check the box. Could you expand a little bit on, you also talked about how certain pieces of research, and it may not even be based on how they're constructed or how great the slides look, really have a profound and cumulative impact on a knowledge estate within a company and have impact. Could you talk about sort of what that thesis was, I guess, of that talk, and also just sort of how you see it, because it seems like something you're passionate about.
And this is my all-time favorite topic. I mean, I kind of make a like a hobby or a habit of going when I go to these conferences of doing a talk like that, because I'm not really allowed to go to conferences and talk trade secrets, and divulge like information about Universal. Like that would get me fired in a heartbeat. So I tend to give more, kind of whatever you call them, like think pieces. I put together something that's like intentionally a little provocative, that kind of pokes us as market researchers in some of our more spaces. And I enjoy it. I find that, there's a certain segment of the population, I'm sure, who's very offended by the things that I do and say, but there's another segment that's like, those are my people. They're like,
that's the fun of it.
Thank you for speaking what we all think and feel out loud so we can talk about it. So that's, it's kind of like a shtick. That particular talk was actually inspired by one of my all-time favorite books by the late great anthropologist David Graeber, and the book is called Bullshit Jobs Theory. And I highly recommend. It's an incredible book. It's so fun, and this is an incredible author, incredible anthropologist and academic. But in that book, he actually has a thesis that a huge percentage of the time spent by white collar workers in the Western world, whatever you call that, are engaged in work that is absolutely not necessary.
Right.
That if they all stopped doing it tomorrow, the world would be no different.
Mm-hmm.
And the part, per his definition, that makes the work bullshit is that the person doing the work knows it. Mm-hmm. And that creates such a tremendous sense of psychological unease. Because as humans, like, we want to matter. Like, we want our work to matter. So, like, the best thing to be is the kind of market researcher who is doing bullshit work, check the box work, and just have no awareness of it. You're like, you're like in the Matrix. Don't eat the pill. Like, you're happy. Do that. Live that life. But like, I personally can't live that life. And the most astute, long-lived researchers at some point in their careers see enough in the war zone to know that, like, some of the questions we're being asked are really kind of dumb. And some people are using us not really because they're trying to understand something or use knowledge, but we're being used for like political purposes, or we're actually being used for vanity purposes. People make themselves look smart or good or win some sort of battle. There is, and then there's a whole side of measurement that is not just a consumer insights thing, but a sort of KPI thing, right? Mm-hmm. Measurement for measurement's sake. If it's not measured, it doesn't matter. There's all of this endless, mostly useless measurement that goes on in business contexts, I believe. And so, another talk that I've given with my colleague and the director of my ethnographic program, Dr. Kate Brailsford, it was about quantification culture within our own organization and how, defaulting to quantified measurement when we're talking about human issues is sort of a performance that we put on. And sometimes we talk about the statistic or the measurement as opposed to the thing. I'm very fond of saying to my clients, we have a CSAT. It's called GSAT, guest satisfaction. We have a survey, right? As you expect we might. We have lots of metrics. It's a great survey, beautiful data set. I can talk to you about the ins and outs and what causes all sorts of theme park behavior for days and days and days with it, right? But on a weekly basis, a lot of these KPIs are not that interesting, because they move seasonally or based on huge factors that for the most part we don't have control of, like crowding levels, etc.
Rain 3 days last week.
Weather, stuff like that, right? It's frankly kind of obvious, but I learned over time that just the act of putting out that data weekly was almost an act of violence against the organization because it caused organizational reactivity, it caused pointless conversations, right? It caused people to pay more attention to GSAT than guest satisfaction. And so I'm really fond of saying GSAT is not guest satisfaction. GSAT is a metric, it's a proxy, it's a valuable tool, but let's not sacrifice ourselves on the altar of this KPI, we've got like real things to do here, right? And it's a very weird position to be in. I find myself to be the person in the organization almost advocating against using data half the time.
Right. Yeah.
Which is insane, right? And probably not advisable for most people. But when I read Graeber's book, I thought this is true. He has a whole category that he calls box checking. And plenty of people's jobs are in the box checking category, but market researchers are among them. And again, that is defined by him as, work you do, for the sake of saying you had done it, but having no other specific purpose, right? So the talk I gave essentially was how to avoid the trap of box checking. A set of principles and guidelines that you can enact as a market researcher or leader of a team to identify box checking when it is happening and to prevent it from happening, or in certain cases when it's necessary, how to manage that in a way where you don't hate yourself and just feel demoralized. If you've taken that pill and you're out of the matrix, there's got to be a coping mechanism for those of us who are like very aware of how BS, not just market research, but all of business,
all that stuff,
can
PDF
be
reports.
Right, PDF reports, and that's what it is. It's the office space environment, and I choose to look it dead in the face, talk about it, talk to my team about it, sort things out, because I think otherwise we're just all engaging in a endless performance, and that is kind of a drag and a bummer. And I don't want to do that.
Life's too short, careers are too short. To that point, in the previous episode, I was sitting around with a couple of Finch colleagues, and we were talking about, sort of what's happening in the industry and in the world. And we were talking, not surprisingly, as everyone is, about kind of what we're seeing is the two extremes. It's like the middle's hollowing out. On the extreme, technology and AI is making certain things possible. On the extreme other end, nothing will take the place of human experience and observation and some of those really immersive methodologies. And it's the stuff in between, some of which may be dumb research, that seems to be diminishing. And love to get your take just on kind of AI and technology in general without disclosing anything proprietary. But one of the points that John made, in a job hopping era, though you and I are both excluded from that, but in a job hopping era, one of the promises of AI is to reduce the amount of dumb research you do. And by that dumb, it isn't the CYA as much as it is the same study 4 years in a row because there are different stakeholders who didn't read the previous three.
Monotonous stuff.
Asking the same question again because all the stakeholders have changed and they need to do it themselves or whatever. Thoughts on AI generally, and then beyond that, its potential as an antidote to some degree, at least, to that knowledge estate problem, the cumulative nature of that may be lost in a rapidly changing, job hopping kind of department or era.
There's so much in this space to unpack. First, I always approach this stuff with a fair degree of skepticism, because for those of us who've been in the market research industry for many, many years, like, you've seen stuff like this before. There was a time when people were like, oh, that's it, surveys are dead because we have neuroscience, right? And now we'll just be able to track eyeballs and measure skin conducted, you know what I mean? And we don't need to do these surveys at all. And that turned out to be patently false, right?
Sure.
This is, I think, similar to that, but very different, right? Like this is real. Like, anybody who is using, these ChatGPTs and stuff, like, knows that this is like a magic that is clearly like very qualitatively different. Right. And so there is like tremendous opportunity there. So, I am looking at it. My team is looking at it as a way to avoid drudgery, front work, routine, monotonous tasks. Like, why employ a human to do something that's boring and that can be done over and over again when you can make it efficient using AI? So we are really looking at that space. And I'm not worried about it so much as like a threat to like human jobs, only because there's so much we could actually be doing with our real useful brains.
Right.
That just, to be able to get rid of the drudgery, we are really looking in that space. Whatever we can automate, we're going to be looking to do it. And there are pathways, to do that with AI. And if you're not looking at that, I think you're really a silly person, That being said, like, we're not there yet. And I think what's most irritating about this space, and this is a necessary evil of the industry, is just, I'll call them lies, but, probably more like over promises that all the vendors are making. Because, they just crawl right out of the woods and everybody's got an AI layer over everything they sell.
Right.
And they don't tell you the truth about it. They don't tell you like what it actually does and what its limits are. They sell it to you and they act like this thing. I've talked to multiple vendors who are like, we have end-to-end reporting engines. We'll write your survey and we'll get your survey fielded and we'll synthesize these data sets and we'll run all these banners and we'll write a report and we'll output reports and you don't need any humans at all. They're making those claims. And whenever I say, okay, show me, here's a data set, let's see. All it really does is spit out the most superficial sort of insights that, again, are fine and probably will do a lot of the box checking. So I do think that when you do have to box check, when you are sort of just providing data for the performance of providing data, so it seems like you're productive and your clients feel like they're getting something, and they're not looking too deep and not thinking too hard, these outputs are fine. And I remove like some of the qualitative analysis from this, because I think that the synthesis of video and the synthesis of transcripts, that's just super useful, to real qualitative researchers, very efficient, but I am talking about like the human insights and synthesis and analysis. From what I've seen, for the most part, it does a great job at generating mediocre insights.
Right.
I think, and you've heard this before, like ChatGPT, it's like asking a C student something, you know what I mean? And so like, that's the kind of work you're getting. You're getting C student work. The tragedy is that C student work passes for okay work in a lot of veins. So I do think that if you're working for an organization that is pretty uneducated about what really good data looks like, you could actually get some of these tools and trick a lot of people into thinking you're doing a lot of really great work. But, my perspective on it is I'm looking to reduce drudgery, reduce repetition, save resources. Even save labor where I can. Like, why wouldn't I do that? Mm-hmm. But yeah, at least so far, like, these things don't show even the most minute chance of replacing the seasoned researchers on my team.
Certainly.
Not a scratch on them. Like, there's just no competing with, a human who's actually really educated in the space and understands the difference between good and bad research. I'll watch it with interest. If it replaces all of us one day, I'll be like, oh, look at that. That's interesting. But it ain't there yet. It just isn't.
Right. Now, a lot of it's vapor. At this point.
But it's a great, I love it as a think tool, right?
Yeah.
I ask Copilot or ChatGPT half a dozen questions a day at least.
Sure.
As a thought partner, as somebody just to idea generate, it's so freaking useful. Mm-hmm. You just have to treat its answers with discernment.
Yeah, of course.
And that's why it's dangerous. All these vendors saying like, oh, it's going to, synthesize its responses and it's going to, that only passes for like a useful deliverable on an audience that's like ignorant of the subject matter. Anybody who knows anything about the space is going to be like, that's obvious. That's wrong. Mm-hmm. That part's good. But if you're not that person, how do you know?
Right. Someone has to operate it.
You don't.
Yeah. And harness it. Right. And someone who has enough perspective. I love it too, but then I'll search for things that I know a lot about. It's like people talk about the media. I'm not going to bash the media. I respect the media, but it's like when they do a story about something you know a lot about and you realize how off.
Yeah. That's what it's like. That's what it's like. So I think it's going to be great for doing superficial research.
Yeah.
And it's a tragedy that superficial research passes for good research in so many domains.
Yeah. No,
and I think it's going to be abused in that capacity. I really, really do. I think ultimately there's a real risk that it will diminish our value because it will seem too easy. I saw a post on LinkedIn. I don't know who it was. It was some vendor basically just saying, this is going to do all your research for you. Your research is over.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's personally really offensive to me.
Right. Well, we're not quite ready for it to be over. Right.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time,
yeah.
like, look, if we don't actually do good research, we deserve our fate. You know what I
course.
mean? If you can't actually demonstrate the difference between your output and what these AI can produce,
Right.
you deserve to lose your job.
I mean, there have been certain, I won't name names, but certain organizations that we've worked with where, a new leader came in and they're more big data than primary research. They're more,
Yeah.
They don't believe in quality, things like that, that on its face is absurd. But I mean, it's not a unique mindset. I think it's a harmful mindset. It's a mindset that deprives an organization, but it certainly wouldn't be the first time we've heard it.
No, no.
Yeah. As I want to keep my promise to you to get you out of here, let's kind of land the plane with, you talked about your career and other things and how you were seeing it early on and how, certain things you mentioned that you counsel, junior folks on your team and others along the way. Are there, for those who maybe in our audience who are kind of starting out or starting over, I know that not nobody, but almost nobody dreamt of a market research career from the professional cradle, but those of us who are in it have fallen in love with it for a variety of reasons. Any words of wisdom that you would share with someone who's early in their career path, who has an interest in research, but hasn't, necessarily taken the steps?
I mean, I'm so bad at this. I mean, and it's just because I have like a very, very sort of elitist, extreme point of view on this. You know what I mean? So like, I wouldn't say it's advice, but it's mostly just like a warning. And that would be just like, know who you are, like know who you freaking are. So like, if you want to be somebody who, kind of superficially understands methodology, thinks you can bring a guy with a business degree off the street and you can write a survey, next day and it's all fine. Like this industry is maybe for you, you know what I mean? Because you can build a pretty great career being fairly superficial about how you operate, and, if you're really, a stickler for method and rigor, it's going to be challenging to work in this environment. It really, really is. It's frustrating. And, honestly, if the advice is know who you are too, because no matter what you say about researchers getting a seat at a table, and I think, after 12 years at Universal and my really good team, I have a really great boss. We have a pretty good like internal reputation and a lot of influence, right? But at the end of the day, like I'm not a dummy. Like they can do everything without us. They legit could. They can make all the decisions without us. Mm-hmm. If our department was eliminated tomorrow, they would just be like, okay, I guess we'll just make our best guess. And, a lot wouldn't even change, as a result of it, and as a result of that, if you're working in market research, you got to know you're working in relative to other functions in a corporate business is stigmatized, so if you are like the most ambitious person and if you're about, being, seen and heard and, having influence, and if your ego and ambition is really all that important to you, like go pick a different field. I mean, this field is for the cast outs, like it's for the nerds, like it's for, the socially awkward. Like this, this ain't for you, go be a finance bro, like go figure it out, I don't know, but there's a lot. Yeah.
It is for the people though, like you, like me, who love to understand what makes people tick, who are, when I can't help when I walk through the grocery store, when I'm really just there to get my list done and feed the family for the week, to go down and look to the left and the right and try to sort of retrace the steps of that box on the shelf as to what was the insight that led, and in some cases there may not have been a good answer, but for folks who would have done it the way it was ultimately done, what's sort of the chain of decisions that led to that new yogurt or whatever? And you're right, some of these categories are more interesting than others, but the kind of person who loves that if they're a workhorse and not a show horse, if their goal is, big ideas and stuff. I mean, this is a place for them. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree 100% with that. I mean, my whole leadership team is made up of people who share my intrinsic curiosity about things and a passion for understanding and just a fascination with the mundane, and that's enough. Like that's what gets you up and you go to work every day for. It's like, okay, I'm going to solve this problem. Like that's what I get excited about. That's what my leadership team gets excited about. It's like, we're going to figure this out. This is fun. So I think it can be an incredibly fun job, incredibly like cognitively rewarding.
Sure.
And really, I mean, people don't talk about this enough, but as much as I say like, oh, they could get rid of us tomorrow, because again, they totally could. And you should know that.
Yeah.
There's actually a great part about that, because you're not actually responsible for anybody's bottom line.
Right.
You're not, I mean, there's deadlines and urgencies, but like me and my boss have a joke, like there's no research emergencies. Like any sort of research emergency, that's a fake fire. That's a made up deadline. There's no research emergencies. Okay. So like there are plenty of jobs where you're, working late because you have to, or getting your hands dirty, or, really being responsible or accountable for a lot of really hard decisions, where we could kind of sit on the side and think thoughts and say, this is what we think. And it's kind of a privileged ivory chair sort of existence in a way. And, I think that privilege of being able to think for a living,
Yeah, sure. Well, there's integrity to that.
There is integrity, but I mean, there's also
protected.
Like, I think some people are jealous of it. People are like, I wish I could just sit around and think deep thoughts for a living. Like they pay you for that. I actually have to get this thing out. I got to make this campaign. I got to go make these tickets. I got to go do this real thing. And you just get to sit around and philosophize. Like that's not cool. I mean, so, I think it's really fun. It's the right job for the right person, but you got to know who you are, when you pick a job like this.
No, it's perfect. And a great place to leave it. Jennifer, thank you so much for your time and your insight and your candor, which is so refreshing and meaningful to me, and I know to our listeners, and we're really excited to have had this time with you.
Thank you for having me.
Many thanks to Jennifer for her time, her insight, and her candor, which is refreshing and highly valuable, I think, for those in the field and those interested in the insights field, and those who really want to be champions of purposeful change, as this podcast is called. As always, 3 ways to support us here. Way 1, click subscribe. You will not miss a single episode. It'll float magically down into the podcast player of your choice. We're doing it monthly, but it isn't always, the third Wednesday of every month. It's whenever we're ready. And clicking subscribe will make sure you don't miss an episode when there is new content to enjoy. The other 2 ways, give us a rating and a review in the podcast store or app or player of your choice. That'll make sure we can get found, as well as gather the kind of feedback that helps make sure that this is always of interest. And that's the second. The third way is similarly, give us some feedback or ideas for future guests or topics on Twitter at Bill Gullen, at Fitch Brands, or via email or any other social channel, however you'd like. We'd love to hear from listeners. We'd love to hear ideas, feedback, and everything else. Hope everyone is doing great, staying warm, and we'll sign off from the Cradle of Liberty.